Oh, and we're live. Welcome to the Cloud Foundry Sunday, Cloud Foundry After Dark. Except for
Dude,
Simon,
that's
who
that's
joins
a
us
pretty
from
good name.
Australia. He lives in the future. He's in Monday. So why don't we start with a little round of introductions real fast, just because we're a small group. Simon, tell us about yourself.
Hey everyone, so I'm Alicia. I'm Field CTO down here in Melbourne, Australia. Coming to you from the future. It's Monday afternoon here, just to freak you out a little bit. Bit about myself, been around for a long time, started off in mainframes. So I love talking about distributed systems compared to the big iron that I used to use. But pretty much into all things around the distributed nature of systems, ways of building new architectures, things that work, things that don't. Like to help people learn. That's pretty cool.
Just while we're talking about
Wait, so
Simon,
you came from
That's
the past and now
a
you live in the
bit
future.
about me.
you also used to
It's
work at
amazing, isn't it?
Amazon. You used to work at Amazon, right? Until you joined the
I
Pivotal.
did. I did. The last 3S wave of the cloudification. It's been very
Love
cool.
me some cloud.
Is Simon freezing for everyone, or just me?
Yeah, is it well, the future has less bandwidth than the present. I think
Okay.
this happens.
Has to come across.
I'm a long way away. Give me a break.
All right, right on. So everyone else is muted, but you're here, Josh. We know you, right?
Yeah, I think most people
You're
know
another
me.
CTO of the field. On the other
I'm another field CTO. I think we have only field CTOs on this call now. Actually, I think Sonny's a field CTO as well, which is amazing. Although he's of the mobile persuasion.
it's a
I
three
am
of a kind.
I am much less mobile than Sonny. I'm actually on my couch. I'm entirely immobile.
So anyone who's out there watching it can join us. I think Wars is going to join us eventually. And if you have any topics, feel free to throw them into the Cloud Foundry Twitter or jump in and talk with us. This week had some interesting stuff. There's a bunch of stuff, but just to highlight, I think there's the foundation stuff. There was a financial services common platform as a service architecture panel that we might want to talk about. There's always containers and distributed system stuff. Recon's coming up. I know our friends over there at Basho have a little conference coming up this week. DevOps Days is going on in Ghent, the 5-year anniversary of DevOps Day, so that's another big thing this week. What else? That's enough to get started. Where do you guys want to start? What's everyone feeling?
That's a lot, man. But I missed a lot of the Cloud Foundry Foundation news this week. So why don't you cover that just for me?
So the big thing that happened this week, I mean, there's lots of stuff going on behind the scenes, and with all the logos and market cap involved, there's probably more lawyers than most people on this hangout would care to deal with. But the main thing that happened this week was they posted all the draft documents. So there's bylaws and there's a code of conduct. There's like 6-7 documents that are all posted. There's a blog post on the cloudfoundry.org blog, and then there's also a link to from the Pivotal blog, and I believe a bunch of the other foundation members. And then look at this guy. Look what the cat dragged in. There goes.
Totally.
Look
Randy
at
Pies,
He's
good
on
to
mute
see
right
you.
now, but
He'll
he's
be off in a second.
he joined the federation over there at the Cloud School.
Hey, Randy, I don't know if you had a chance to see these Cloud Foundry Foundation docs that Schaefer was just bringing up, but I know since you and I were involved in drafting documents for the OpenStack Foundation, it's always fun to look at, how folks do things better in round 2. It's like version 2 or version 3, I guess, now, if you think of Apache Software Foundation as being version 1. How do you think this is going? Have you watched the CF process at all?
No.
He's been focused on things. He's been focused on things over there. He sold a company. Hey,
I've been very heads down for the last couple of months.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. James, how do you feel?
I'll tell you what we did better, Josh, because I learned from you.
I'm always happy to go first and be wrong.
A couple things is we didn't make the board a one-for-one representation of everyone who gave us money. That was really genius insight that we had, that maybe having everyone in the movie theater vote on the plot every time the movie changed might be effective in terms of generating compelling narrative. So that was a nice move that we had. And then I think the second thing we learned from OpenStack was define core before you enable the whole board to vote on it. So come into the foundation with it already defined, so that it's not about any self-interest in terms of how it's shaped. And we also had good momentum from just the way it's been working for the last 3 years. We just said, hey, whatever that is, that's core, and away we went.
Well, we kind of had the benefit of having a working core when we started.
Well, yeah, we run the thing as a service, so it's really simple. You're like, hey, what do you need to run this as a service effectively for tens of thousands of users and apps or hundreds of thousands of users of apps? Okay, that's core.
Well, I'm just saying when OpenStack Foundation was started, you didn't really have a project that could run as a service.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really grateful to OpenStack. I think they blazed the trail, and they got everyone in the world excited about doing this kind of thing, and we got to benefit from all of the experience that they generated in the market. And
I mean, I've had a lot of fun in the last 2.5 weeks now, 3 weeks, I guess, being able to say, look, what OpenStack promised, Cloud Foundry delivers. And I think it's interesting that's true in a lot of cases on the technical level. It's not OpenStack's fault, right? It's just when people got excited about cloud, a lot of the folks were like, this is going to change everything. What they actually wanted out of it was what platform delivers and not what you can really get out of agile infrastructure. But I think we also
joke's on us, though, because we have to make it work on top of OpenStack.
You know, the one thing that I think that worries me still in Cloud Foundry, when I look at the members of the foundation and I look at the maturity of core, is that CF has the same sort of hole that says, we have an idea about future networking that's going to fit in right here, and our networking story is going to get way more rich, robust, and complicated. And I talk to folks like Swisscom and others who are like, we're going to use Cloud Foundry as a platform for NFV, and the sort of we'll do networking second thing that happened inside OpenStack with Neutron was really painful. So I don't know if anyone else is seeing that and going, oh, I'm a little nervous here, but I'm a little nervous there.
I think one of the things is the mentality, though. If you look at what's happening in Cloud Foundry, the willingness that there seems to be to essentially do open heart surgery on the platform wherever necessary to make it better. That's what we're seeing with Diego. You just would not see that with many other projects, and I think that's what we'll probably see on the networking side in the medium term. It's a big thing to do, and it's an important thing to do. It's, I think, a testament to the way the stack is built and can change over time and grow as the services grow, because I think something we've learned, if we talk about learnings, is that the world isn't staying still. It's going way faster, and things are changing even quicker than they were 2-3 years ago. So if you're building kind of this ossified, layered approach that everything has to be just so, you're not going to go anywhere. If you're willing to say, hey, we're going to make these changes and change it in flight, but do it in a clever way, I think you're really ahead of the game.
You know what's amazing about, and I don't know if this is in the bylaws, but the reason you can make a massive change to Cloud Foundry and be like, hey, we're going to take the core of Elastic Runtime and rewrite it and actually push that into production and never, 1 week PWS is running old scheduler, now it's running Diego. The reason is because CF, as much as there's lots of companies, has one team. And this idea of the dojo process, where if you want to become a contributor to Cloud Foundry, you've got to sit down with existing contributors and pair program with them to get up to speed, that is something I wish we had done more aggressively at Opens, because we did it in the early days, and that was part of why things worked pretty well when we were first ramping up. But we didn't know how to make that scale, and I think the fact that Cloud Foundry has committed to scaling the Dojo program is one of the things that's amazing and amazingly different.
No, I think that's totally key. I mean, it's interesting. You look at these projects and how they go along, and like with any project, if we're not learning from what came before us and how we did things previously, we're not going to do any better. And as good as everything is in the past, to some degree everything sucks. And you look at it and say, well, if I'd known then what I know now, I would have done it completely different. It's the old mythical man.
I missed last week's Hangout because I was in Asia meeting with some very large OpenStack users, and they were like, yeah, we're still going
to try the first way we do.
We're losing Simon a bit.
Network's killing us.
Just that idea that to the extent that everything we built before was awesome, it all still sucks now. I was in Asia last weekend, missed the Hangout, chatting with folks running a really big OpenStack cloud, and they're like, "We're still running Novanet," and I'm like, "I'm so sorry." Every time somebody says they're running Novanet, I feel like I have to personally apologize for their experience.
So I pulled up the page now, so just to enumerate what was posted, these are the documents that were posted. The Community Code of Conduct, bylaws, development governance policy, membership agreement, individual CLA, corporate CLA, intellectual property policy, and antitrust guidelines that were all posted, and it's a lot of, most of it's lawyerly. I read most of it, and there's a advisory board meeting coming up this week that if people are interested in this kind of stuff, which I assume you are if you're listening to this, then that's open, I believe, to anyone to listen.
Yeah, that's Wednesday morning again, right? Wednesday in North America, I should say, just to clarify.
I can find the exact. So I think, is there anything else we want to talk about Foundation, or should we go to another topic? Who's got something interesting? Or we can go to the Financial Services Common Pass Architecture Working Group topic.
Yeah, I want to hear about that. That's interesting. Whenever we get some big hitters together to try and agree on something, it always yields some interesting outcomes. So I want to hear what you got there.
So you want to lead that, Josh? You were the one that had the most exposure to what the process and the kind of...
For that working group? Yeah. I mean,
it wasn't just Cloud Foundry. So there was a bunch of different vendors and a bunch of different potential buyers.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an evolution of similar working groups, say, years ago around IaaS and what they were calling the sort of common model, common reference architecture model. But I think financial services have a pretty pathologically worst case environment. They operate all around the world. They have really sensitive data locality requirements. They're obviously a major target for attacks, so they're very security sensitive, but they're also doing really cutting edge work in the sense of low latency, high volume, data processing, raw analytics. And so they have pretty sophisticated understanding of what they want out of platform as a service, and they're trying to figure out how to get all of their vendors, or everyone they see as a vendor, into a row of checkboxes where they can compare them. And I think what was interesting about going through this working group process is, without speaking maybe out of turn as obviously a Cloud Foundry enthusiast, but I think Cloud Foundry really does represent the reference architecture at this point in PaaS, and that's James's fault more than anyone else. What we ended up doing is we did it as a block diagram first, then we did it as a set of workflows, and then we did it as a set of sort of these are use cases and these are the primary actors. Looked at the different responsibilities and actions for each of the actors, and we're all also pretty clear on where we're going next. In the sense of these pieces that no one in platform has really addressed, what we would consider to be up the stack. So I think that's really comforting. We did a bunch of follow-on meetings with some of those customers in the last week, and James, do you want to talk a little more about your perception of how they relate to that model and how that baked out?
I think the interesting thing for me was, Josh, I mean, as you know, we spent the day with either the largest or one of the largest financial services company in the world who couldn't actually make the event, so you and I were here with them, and we had an awesome architect, Francois, from our New York team there, and he described a really interesting event where there were some proprietary vendors that are still trying to make a last stand in the platform as a service space, and I think for them this is a must-win event because as you said, this is the sort of a worst case scenario for complexity, and if there's one place proprietary product could maybe try to add some extra features that no one else in the market might necessarily have and sell at the very high end, it might be financial services. And so, go ahead.
I was just going to say there were two really interesting places where the difference didn't fit in the architecture model. It actually fits in the feature set. One of them is open source, and the original discussion, we've been having these calls twice a week for a while on what is the architecture was going to be presented, and then there was this event to really review it. One of the things that didn't really come out in the calls, but I think came out more strongly, and Francois talked about this in terms of being the event, is open source is not an architectural characteristic, it's a must-have. It is a must-have of any vendor playing in this space at this point.
And that's the anecdote that really rung home for me, was that one of the proprietary vendors tried to make kind of a desperate last stand and to berate our guy as he was talking about, like, well, open source is not a good idea, and like listing that all off. And from my understanding, all of the top banks present there actually stood up and were like, what are you talking about, man? Open source is the only way we're going to go in the future. And actually, we're aligned with Cloud Foundry. In fact, one of the members of the working commission from Fidelity liked implementing Cloud Foundry there so much that he's now a pivotal employee, and we should have him on the show soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was sort of one of these, like when the nerd's getting picked on and, the jock kid is pushing him around and everyone comes to their defense. So you could, in the 1980s movie, that's just how I picture it, with the proprietary jock vendor picking on the little open source nerd, and then everyone jumps
Revenge of the Nerds. It's that scene.
To be fair, I think Cloud Foundry has more market cap behind it than any of these proprietary vendors.
I like several of them.
That nerd's got some pretty big muscles these days.
Yeah. You guys know I like fighting from an underdog position. That's just how I roll.
Yeah. So the other piece that came up in that, and then came up later this week at dinner with this set of bankers, is, the one gap, and I think this gets called out with the NFV discussion as well. The one gap in Cloud Foundry, people say, hey, look, you don't really have a good policy story. And so I'd gone to these customers and said, what do you want our policy story to be? And they said, we actually don't want Cloud Foundry to have policy. We want you to use an external policy project. And this is, Randy, if you're down with this up for it, I'd love for you to talk about Congress. Because Randy and I were talking a little earlier this evening about Congress, which is an OpenStack policy project that VMware, as a member of the Federation, has really been pushing forward. And this came up a couple of times this week with these customers saying, hey, would you be willing to look at Cloud Foundry drawing from Congress as a policy store? And really the idea that whether it's Congress or it's another policy baked into the PaaS layer or into the networking layer or into the IaaS layer, or they want it standalone, they want it separate, they want it dealt with the same way Auth is. Auth is dealt with as integration.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear them say that, Josh, it's no secret that my old friend Derek left the group to try to build policy into the PaaS in a way that was not kind of extensible to OpenStack or other things, or he didn't build it as a project independent thing. And I think the only place where a project like that really could have taken hold would be financial services. So some of those exact people we were talking to this week. So I think the community needs to wake up in that group and provide a third-party thing that can do policy across OpenStack, across storage vendors, across platform vendors.
Yeah.
But that was it was an interesting validation of the open source extensible approach as opposed to the proprietary solution vacuum sealed approach.
I'm going to see Derek in Paris in about a week, and in the same way that we had this very public message to Oracle saying, Oracle, you should join Cloud Foundry. We'd like you to come in from the cold. And I've also been saying the same thing to Red Hat now for a year. Red Hat, where are you? Why are you doing that silly thing you're still doing?
I think, to Derek's credit, he left when things were pretty bad under Mark Lukowski. And I've never talked in the record about this, but it's the Cloud Hangouts. It's 8 o'clock in a Sunday night. Who cares? Yeah. I think it wasn't a great times, and Mark was the project wasn't in great shape the month that Derek left, and so I can understand why he did that. But the reason I never went with them was I just felt like that exact conversation that happened at the Wall Street Summit around open source as the dominant design. Yeah. Like, I was like, dude, I don't want to get in front of that train. I was like, no individual feature or widget is going to stop that train from running.
Yeah. This is sort of the OpenStack lesson, right? Is the open source community, the open source with community is going to win. I'm going to talk to Derek in Paris and see if I can't get him to, come back in from the cold in the sense of I have a lot of
You could
respectably
make a
so.
killing if you wrote a third-party policy engine that was extensible on top of OpenStack and Cloud Foundry, and that would be a really happy ending for all of us.
This is where the key is not just the open source component, but it's the loosely coupled component. So that extensibility, not being so tightly bound in that changing anything is really, really hard. But building that ecosystem with that loosely coupled approach so you can choose the components you need for the particular business domain you're in. So as you said, financial services needs totally different things than manufacturing needs. Some have some things in common, some don't. You've got to have the choice.
Since we ended up on this policy topic and we've got Suni on here, as well as Matt Stein, Suni, do you want to jump in and say, Sonny, sorry, I keep doing that. Sonny, do you want to jump in a bit on the sort of where do you see policy fitting in with the explosion of mobile apps and IoT?
Yeah, I mean, this is why, from our point of view, just like kind of looking inside the sausage factory a little bit, but we took some of the stuff that we were thinking of doing with respect to policy and mobile and kind of weaved it in with the work that we're doing on UAA, right? And I think, like from a policy perspective, like people are looking at mobile in a couple of different places, right? Obviously, you have like just device management, which we don't look at today, and this is more like access and authorization, right? Where that's where people are trying to do everything from their mobile devices, and how can we control what who has access to what, and what once they do have access, like what pieces they can access, and how can we do that in a simple way for developers? That is just sort of the sort of the key piece in the enterprise now, right? And so similar to the way Jim was talking about sort of legacy vendors. This is the only thing that's really left in the legacy mobile application development platform, which is sort of the Coney or the Worklight or SAP mobile platform, right? This is the only thing that those guys are still hanging on to, is because they have such a good tight integration with sort of policy type services. So I think as we bring that to the platform, that'll be a really, really powerful thing for us.
Stein, what are you seeing from the developer side? Do developers care about policy? Or is this just operators got to deal with it?
Are you asking me what I think developers should think, or what they actually do think?
What have you programmed them to think this week?
What have I programmed? I'm always programming developers to think about stuff that they don't want to think about.
Dude, every time I see you do a demo, every developer in the room was like, "Can we please be like you? Please tell us what to think and how to do it." Like it's the microservices demo you did last. Sorry,
yeah,
I didn't even get.
I was going to say, not to derail the conversation, but Matt, why don't you talk what you're showing off a little bit in a couple meetings we had this last week? It was pretty hot.
Oh,
Yeah.
Do we stop anything about this and go to the microservices topic?
Let's do that. It just naturally happened without moderation, Andrew.
Is that what we're doing here? Or are we?
I like closure. I need closure, James.
Well, my closure is that open source won and PaaS won on Wall Street. That's how open source platform is going to win on Wall Street. I'm saying it for sure. It already happened. The world, the whole world doesn't know that yet, but it happened in the meeting, and it's gonna get. I mean, Josh and I are seeing it front row seats, right?
And they're also going to build some microservices over there.
I think that'll be a later on effect. I think that's less immediate, but I think some of the patterns Matt will show you are going to be very interesting. I just got to come out and say, like, dude, I did not mean to start like a tornado with this microservices thing. I thought it was like important, but now people like think you can't write an app without doing that. So I don't want it to become like, your first app has to have 29 services to print hello world, or it wasn't cool.
Dude, it's like perfect storm. You know what I'm saying?
It's like I feel like where did we start?
It's like James Waters from the West and Martin Fowler from wherever he's sitting, and it's all converging.
So tell us what we're looking at, Matt.
So I've got a little architecture diagram up on the screen, which is actually embedded in the app, which I really thank Dave Sire for doing that. So this is a demo we've taken out for a spin, probably about 15 or 20 times now in various settings, and basically what this is an attempt to show off a little baby microservices architecture, but in the context of a bunch of boilerplate patterns that are being put together as part of Spring Cloud, which naturally has a home on top of Cloud Foundry as a hosting platform for all of this stuff.
So this is important, like people don't realize. Amazon Web Services, for instance, Amazon doesn't own Spring, which is the #1 Java development platform. Like that's a pivotal technology that is part of our whole stack now.
That's right, and the cool thing is we took a bunch of open source components from Netflix that that they built to be Amazon native, and very naturally put them on top of Cloud Foundry and then wrapped them in our Spring programming model. And yeah, now we've got all of these nice boilerplate patterns that Netflix is using in production. With we all know what kind of traffic they're powering with this stuff. And
they're in production before they're on the open source.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they solve problems, right? And then once they've solved the problem enough times and kind of standardize it across their architecture, they start taking the stuff that's not proprietary core streaming technology and putting it out there for other folks to use. So we're just leveraging that, and to the Spring team's credit, they're making consuming this stuff a whole lot easier enough to the fact that Netflix is starting to move towards our way of consuming the technology as opposed to the way that they originally decided to consume the technology. They're moving all of their stuff over to this Spring Boot programming model, which is where kind of we're plugging in all of these services where, spinning up one of these things is slapping an annotation on a Java class, and now you've got a service registry discovery engine or a distributed config server, client-side load balancer, circuit breaker dashboard. All that stuff is pretty straightforward and simple to get going.
So we can give developers, just to be clear, Matt, we can give them over time the ability to consume that as a Cloud Foundry service.
Right. That's the next step up, is taking, say, the green box here, the orange box here, the pink box here, and turning those into Cloud Foundry services that you're just binding to, and ultimately, just another thing that Bosch is deploying, pivotal operations manager is deploying, and you're not even really thinking about it. It's just sort of there.
Yeah, and actually, I haven't been doing Java in a long time, but this is the first time I've been impressed with Java in a long, and literally, you skipped over this, Matt, but what you just said is, if you want a service for your application and you'd like that service to be auto-launched and auto-managed, you add a decorator to your interface, and then the service is automatically instantiated and configured when your app is pushed.
Yep, that's what this is right here.
Right. That's crazy cool.
So all I'm doing right here is this is a single. This application right here is this config server, and let's see if I can find it real quick. Yeah. So all the code in this class, all the code for this entire app is just this one source file that you see here, and this one source file, by virtue of having this enable config server annotation, is basically saying, yeah, spin up this green box right here. But at the same time, I'm trusting that somewhere else this orange box has been spun up, and because I'm expecting that to be there, this enable Eureka client is basically saying, hey, go find this guy and register yourself as an available service, which means when I go to something like Pivotal Eureka, get it right, I've deployed this to so many different places.
DeepSouthCloud.com, that sounds awesome.
That's the cloud running under my desk right here.
That's his home.
That is the Deep South Cloud running right down here in Mississippi, man.
Can I get an account on Deep South Cloud?
Deep South Cloud is free, man. I just don't have a lot of capacity.
Sweet.
All right.
A barbecue with every CF push.
So I pushed that deal. That guy's up there. That's this guy running. He's going to go find Eureka, and guess what? There we go. Config server is up and running at that spot right there. And that was one annotation that enabled me registering myself. And that works for any app. So I deploy that, any app in this particular space, it's going to go out and take care of that by virtue of the fact that I'm bound to a Eureka service. It's going to register itself with one annotation. And so then you start to say, okay, I've got some services out here now. I've got a little user interface. I've got a little customer's web service that's spitting out customer data. And I got to. It's always funny when people start registering for your demo. So Jerome here is let's see where Jerome is. I have no clue. Anybody know where that is? Let's see. Where is Jerome?
Who is Jerome?
Jerome's in Missouri somewhere. So I've done this demo on a webcast several times, and I just leave the code out there, so people naturally start playing with it. I'm going to go put my name in there and see what happens. So anyway, so what does this app even do? So it's you plus Starbucks stores that are near me, and that's two different servers, or two different microservices serving up that data. And if I were to go and drill under the hood and take a look at the service itself, I don't want that, but I want the data. Okay, so we've got this REST interface, and of course, this another power of Spring sort of thing here. Just the fact that this web service here exists. There's a couple of Java classes out there that tell you what a customer looks like. I slap another annotation on the app, and now I've got a REST API for that class. So we've got this kind of same decorate and add boilerplate configuration, get a service up and running. So this whole service is probably, I'm not going to look at it right now, but it might be, I don't know, 100 lines of code tops. The key piece is this stores nearby. So rather than me embedding the store information, I'm saying go to this other service to get that.
So do this. Yeah, just put that service in.
So tie this back into how Cloud Foundry kind of fits into the picture.
So how does Cloud Foundry fit into this picture? All right.
You've on the rectangles, and you got the services, and
yeah. So every box here, with the exception of the browser, is an app running on Cloud Foundry right now. This config server, dashboard, Eureka service, those are all also set up to be Cloud Foundry services. So today, in this sort of demo mode, this is a user-provided instance, this is a user-provided instance. And so each of these apps is bound to those user-provided instances.
So does that have to go through the service broker model, or how does it?
Not yet. So we did an inception on this while I was out in San Francisco last week, and kind of the model I think we're going to have for the launch is that there's going to be a service broker that will once so we'll deploy these things. We'll also deploy a service broker that puts the config server and the Eureka service in the marketplace. And so for an initial release for a single space deployment, you would be able to register all of this stuff. When we start to go multi-space, then we start to get, which kind of turns right back into the policy discussion, which is, okay, I've got this service registry, and I've got all these different users deploying services in different spaces. So Eureka is not really built as a multi-tenant type deal. So the question is, who gets to register their services in a Eureka based on which space? As soon as you go outside of the space model.
Yeah, but we can bring, for now, with the space model policy to that and control it.
Yeah, so we've talked about some different possibilities. One of which
can you have a Eureka server per, and then your service brokers only allow you to have the role-based access to which one you're supposed to?
Say that again. I was talking over you.
Sorry, if you had a Eureka server per space, and then you could have the service brokers make sure that you have the right access, right credentials.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, Shafe. Right now we just don't have cross-space policy for our service. Services are bound to spaces.
Right. So one of the things that we talked about was the possibility of a service broker that could actually expose a service sitting in one space as a service to another space by virtue of setting up plans that would scope them to an org. So then I could basically, it's kind of like this little toy service broker I was working on a few weeks ago, where I could deploy that, bind my app to it, and then my app would show up in the marketplace, and I could scope it to a whole deployment, or I could scope it to an org. So take that same sort of a model, except say, okay, I'm going to take the Eureka that's sitting in my space, and I'm going to expose it to other orgs as a service that it can bind to, and that way I can control which orgs are allowed to talk to the service broker that the service registry that I've deployed. So that's one way you could do it.
So Stein, how Java specific is the Eureka service discovery? Is that something you could use with other runtimes, and like what is its protocol there?
So it's got a REST API, so theoretically you could take anything.
Yeah, but doesn't have the client libraries it supports? It's not.
Yeah, so there's a decent amount of intelligence that's built into the client library, and that really only exists for Java.
Yeah.
Right now. It's kind of hard to put all of the for a lot of these patterns. It's kind of hard to put all of the smarts in the service component itself, and you end up having some decision making going on client side too. For Ribbon is an example of that. Ribbon is deciding what to do based on the data that it gets from Eureka and the data that it gets from other things. So there's some smarts in there that we would have to duplicate for other languages to have kind of first-class support.
I think it's fascinating to watch PaaS going from being 100% polyglot generic to now it's having some framework-specific extensions. So it supports everything, but now we're going to go really deep in certain frameworks.
I think that's true. Nice. I think the opposite is true, James. Like all the platforms started as super specific. If you look at their Heroku story, you look at the App Engine story, it's the opposite. They started specific and then they went polyglot, and then now you're getting deeper or depth in certain runtimes.
Yeah, I think exactly where it's both stories converging, right? Because what's nice about this pattern is the language-specific pieces are happening as services.
Exactly.
On top of the platform, they're not happening in the platform, which is really
happening in a generic way on top of the platform they're implemented in a generic way as opposed to deep in the platform.
This is where you get the rising tide, lifting all boats. Is that as soon as in the past it was like if one language did something, everyone moved to that language because that framework's got this feature. And that was driving sort of the religious wars of which is the best framework or which is the best language. Now that we can consume them as services, I can be native in the language or languages I'm comfortable with, but get all the goodness from other stuff. So you're not sort of looking longingly at someone else's framework or language. Everyone's getting a go at the best.
One of the things I'm really curious to see mature this year is the communities, the language and framework-specific communities on top of CF. And we're definitely seeing that with the Spring community, partly because there's a lot of crossover, but we're also starting to see Go communities going, hey, we're the folks that do Go on top of CF because CF is the best place to run Golang. I've been pushing the same thing for the Python community now, going, hey, here's some great build packs, and here's some great CI/CD integration, and here's a bunch of sample apps, and here's some good proc files, and here's how best practices. I think as we start to see this in the next 12 months, each community of interest is like, holy crap, we can take advantage of CF in this really interesting way. We're going to start seeing, I'd be curious to see if the Ruby guys ever come back. Sorry.
There's probably some work we could do to make Ruby's experience a little better on Cloud Foundry, to be honest.
So Matt, do you want to get to the cool part where the history trace will fail over?
Yeah, we've kind of left the big
all the opinion machines
bang in the bag
their flavor.
So what happens when stores fails is the big question. Does everything fall apart? And the answer is no, because we threw in the circuit breakers pattern based on using Hystrix from Netflix. So Let me find. There we go. Except I don't want Deep South Cloud right
I
now.
just learned that Matt's #1 website is NFL football.
Yeah, I'm kind of not happy with football right now. So that's kind of a sore topic for me after last night.
Baseball is pretty good right now.
Baseball is making me happier. It's making me happier. I got one game out of 2 last night. So let me hook the dashboard up. This is also going to be much more seamless once we get the release out the door.
So for everyone,
James, as Matt types this in, what and one of the the questions maybe we can talk about here in this smaller group is that and it comes to Josh's point on polyglot support for these type of services. How do we best draw the line on the kind of things that we want to make available just as services, like circuit breaking patterns versus other things as platform services or sort of runtime services? Or anybody can answer that, I guess.
I
don't think there's a bright line, honestly.
Yeah, I don't know the bright line a priori, but I know as a developer, I'd much rather come in and be able to use services that are inherently already scalable and well implemented, and just, as Josh said, decorate and go, and move quickly, versus saying, okay, I want to use a circuit breaker pattern, now I got to go start that app, I have to think about configuring it. I'd much rather just go CF bind to Hystrix.
We should get Ken Lane on here some night because he has a great opinion about this sort of classic argument of do you need an SDK or not? Like if you build a great API, and if you're saying, hey, I'm building a microservice, what you're saying is I have a service that provides an API. If you build a great API, do you need to write an SDK or a client library in each language in order to encourage people to consume it? And sort of the debate we were having is if you have to have a client library, your API probably smells bad.
I think it depends on the complexity of the domain you're talking about. I mean,
true.
Yeah.
But if you have a lot of exposed complexity, again, that's a code smell too. That's an API smell.
But
right?
There are things in the world that are inherently complex, and you have to deal with that. It's
like Schaefer's debating skills. Absolutely true. They are inherently complex.
It depends on.
It's cool. It's the best argument you have.
Matt's trying to show something cool, gentlemen.
All right, let's see what you got.
I'm going to serve something cool, and I'm going to add some fuel to the fire after I'm done showing it. So what I did was, kick off a little shell script to bang on that customer service a little bit. When I hit it, of course, it's hitting that store service. So now I'm going to do something wacky. I'm going to induce a failure. So we'll just stop. We'll make sure I'm talking to the right Cloud Foundry. Yes, I talked to so many. Stops, pivotal stores.
I think usually you're whispering, Matt.
The Cloud Foundry Whisperer, is that what you're trying to say?
DF Whisperer, yes.
That's kind of scary. Okay, so look, the circuit popped to open, and when that happened, our service gracefully degraded. It's still working, it's just not giving me stores data anymore. And how did that work? Well, it worked because in this code, where I actually go out and grab that store information. This is in the customer service app, and it's basically saying build me a hyperlink to that customer data, grab the instance from stores, and try to access it. And it's annotated here again. Decorate with Hystrix command. That wraps it in the circuit breaker behavior, this is where I'm going to add some fuel to the fire in a second. And if you're in a failure mode, so we're saying, okay, I've detected that stores is unhealthy, then I want a fallback. So my fallback is default link, which is just to return null. And so the framework interprets that. This is the REST framework that's building out the API. Interprets null as just don't have any data for that link in this case. So actually, let me kick this again. So circuit is now, these blue numbers are basically instances of the circuit's opened and I issued, kind of the equivalent of that fallback behavior. And then occasionally you're going to see this red number increment where it's going to go out and check to see if it's healthy again. And so it does that on a configurable interval. So now I resuscitate the store service. Come on back. And eventually that thing's going to recover.
So Matt, did we just demonstrate a 5th layer of HA? Because I'm just, to me, I just saw 5 layers of HA now.
The answer is no. It's not HA. Like it's a degraded state.
It's fault tolerance is what it is.
It's graceful handling of the unexpected.
So I have a simple question.
I'm not sure. It looks to me like it accepted availability over consistency to me, but that's just my take.
Randy's got a question.
It looked like AP to me, dog. Last time I thought about that.
This is the problem because we're using different definitions.
I know, but I just like
stores are not highly available.
Let's take
stores. We know.
Randy had a question though. What's Randy's?
Okay.
So pattern actually was with routers and ISP backbones. There used to be this problem, well, it still exists, where there would be route transitions, like a circuit goes down, and that would cause what they call a BGP route flap, because it might cause like that route to be announced and then not announced and then announced again, and it would flip backwards and forth. So it would cause, as you got more of this background noise across the routers in there, it would cause CPU spikes, and they couldn't keep up. So they came up with this mechanism called BGP route flap dampening. And what would happen is that every time that the route flapped, you would add sort of like a numeric value, right, like 10. And then suddenly, once you go out over a certain threshold, say 500 or whatever, it would just stop listening to route announcements for that. And then there would be a decay period on the number until it came back under the threshold of 500. Sort of like the Ethernet back-off stuff when you get collisions on Ethernet. And so does the circuit breaker pattern in this case similar to that, where, you also don't want, your one service to just sit there banging on the other service while it's down. You want it to kind of back way off and then just check in every once in a while until the service is up and then start, really up again. Does that make sense?
That's why it's calling Hystrix for that link, though, right, Matt? It's not.
Yeah. So Hystrix is it's not strictly a back off, but what it does is actually let me pull up a slide real quick, because I've got a slide that illustrates this pretty nice. Because it's actually 3 states. It's not just. Open source. Real quick. It's not just 2 states, it's actually 3. So here's a slide down here at the bottom. So what the circuit breaker is actually doing is when it's in that closed state, everything's happy. When it goes into that open state, what it's basically doing is setting a timeout. And as long as that timer's still running, it's triggering that graceful degradation behavior. But then when that timeout expires, it's going to trip into this state called half open. And basically what that's going to do is say, hey, allow a request to go through, the next one that I get. And if that request succeeds, then we assume it's healthy again. But if that request fails, then we trip back to the open state again and wait. So we're only actually allowing a request through periodically to see if the dependency is healthy again, and if it's not, then we go back into that degraded state. And that's configurable, what the threshold is on that. So if you need it to be longer or shorter, you can tweak those numbers. But
yeah, well, what was interesting about the BGP mechanism is that it was, basically because of the way that the math worked out, like if it just kept route flapping, you just didn't even try very often to actually go back. Like it was a variable about how often it would actually check back in. So it was a very problematic, very noisy, circuit or route.
Yeah.
Then basically you wouldn't even bother to listen to it very often. Whereas if it was just happening, if it was just a blip, then you would be back checking off quickly. Does that make sense? So it kind of moderated itself.
So I will punt and say I haven't drilled into the Hystrix internals enough to know. I would be willing to bet that that algorithm for backoff is actually in there, and you can enable it. I just haven't looked. But if it's not, it's something that might be worth adding at some point.
So there's a bit that's tunable.
Okay, cool.
That's a Netflix open source project, and anyone that's interested in these kinds of patterns should read the release book from Michael Nygaard.
Yeah, right.
Really nice one.
Which basically Adrian Cockcroft walked around Netflix with that book and started handing out copies of it, and then out pops all these frameworks. That's kind of what at least that's how he tells the story.
It's a great book that everyone should read.
Hey Matt, if you would show one other piece of this demo before we run out of time.
Okay.
The thing that I really like about this pattern, because I don't really like this dashboard, and I know this question of can we do this polyglot? Is this too Java specific?
Yeah, we'll make this.
The actual Hystrix stream that's coming out of this is an API endpoint that's consumable by basically any other system. And so, would you just show the stream API?
Yeah, sure.
So this sense of, hey, what is the state of all of my endpoints, and what should I do with that data? This is this raw Hystrix stream that shows you, all of these finely granular metrics about the are you in that half open, are you in a closed state, are you in an open state, how many of your recent requests have failed, how many hosts are reporting, etc. This is where, to my mind, in a larger enterprise setting, Hystrix is one of a bunch of components that work really well as services because the integration is also very straightforward.
See, the thing about Hystrix, though, is Hystrix is strictly a client-side piece. Like, there is actually no Hystrix service in play in this demo at all. There's a framework embedded in the app that is basically providing these circuit breakers between me and the calls that I'm making out, and then the API is kind of a distributed one in that each of the apps that are employing the circuit breaker are streaming out this same data. So then, the ultimate thing is right now I've got a point-to-point connection between this app and this showing the dashboard and the app that I put in. So the way Netflix does this is they have a metrics aggregator called Turbine that is basically aggregating all this and sticking it into a single point. So a couple things are going on. Spring is building kind of a RabbitMQ-based version of this, or at least they've been hacking on it to make this work, because Turbine kind of is a little bit funny in a Cloud Foundry environment, and if you want me to get into that, I can. But so they're working on this, but ultimately what I see is, going back to last week with the metrics pipeline, is that once we have the app emitters, then we basically start emitting the app data for Hystrix into our metrics pipeline, and then it just becomes part of the fire hose with everything else. So you push an app, all your circuit breakers become part of the fire hose instantly.
Right.
So you have those nice annotations around the Java code. How would you implement this same thing, and could you get that same Hystrix behavior from these other stacks?
Well, I mean, like take Golang for example. I know of at least one. I can't think of the name right now. I know of at least one library implementation of the circuit breaker pattern as described by Nygaard that's out there. I even started working on one myself in Go just as a fun project on a plane a few weeks ago, and I never finished it. But it's an interesting. It's kind of interesting. You start to play around with Go routines and channels to make all this stuff work. But yeah.
How is the annotation implemented in the Java? Do you know?
Well, yeah. So let me see if I have the source handy.
Is it just sort of?
I got enough bandwidth to allow this. Come on, download sources. There we go. So the way
go ahead.
So basically, what this is doing is throwing in a bunch of attributes and defaults. So there is a runtime component inside Spring that is intercepting and saying, hey, when you call this method, I see that it's a Hystrix command, And so it's basically observing that that annotation is there, and if anybody is familiar with or remembers aspect-oriented programming, that's basically everything in Spring is an incarnation of AOP, and these annotations are basically invoking that, wrapping this method call in an interceptor that is adding the circuit breaker logic, and then invoking the call.
So when you invoke get stores by whatever, when you put that back up, hold on, get stores by location link, does that have to conform to any sort of like what's the behavior that makes Hystrix work, or does it?
No, that's the cool thing. So what this does, so the way the Hystrix programming model works out of the box is you have to use these things called Hystrix commands. And this is just command object pattern. So basically what you do is you put the code that you wanted to write inside this run method, and then you tell Hystrix, invoke my command. So here they're doing execute, which is just a synchronous blocking call. Here they're doing queue, which is asynchronous, gives me back a Java future. And then they've got their reactive. This is kind of you plugging in the RX Java stuff, where I'm observing, and then I'm getting back an RX Java observable, and I can start to hang callbacks off of that and subscribe to it. So in any case, if I execute queue observe, it's going to take that code and execute it in the context of one of those circuit breakers and start to spit out all those metrics, and also kind of the three-state behavior. And so what Spring is doing is at runtime is basically writing this command object for me and invoking it
Around the method that you define.
around the behavior here. Yeah. So it's basically saying, you know what, that Hystrix command stuff is really intrusive to your app. So what I'm going to do is say, well, you're going to call it basically the same way every time. So I'm just going to write that code for you at runtime.
So Hystrix command is actually a Spring annotation. It's
It's a Spring annotation.
It is now. I mean, this is so Sonny's bugging me. Is like, well, what's the integration story? We didn't write Hystrix. Why are you demoing Adrian Kokoff's stuff on our Hangout? But we wrapped it all in Spring to make it much easier to program, and then we're going to further wrap all these things as services on the platform to make them much easier to invoke. So it's sort of like you go from raw coding to sort of rapid invocation.
Yeah, I mean, I understood what the Spring guys were doing, right? And I see the value there just in the code, just on basically making it, Springified.
Yeah.
What I'd like to see us get to here is how is this any better on CF, right? Because I could take these projects and I could run them, basically as Spring Boot projects, right?
Yeah. I mean, a circuit breaker is going to be a circuit breaker regardless of where you run it. The value is in the metrics in terms of the platform.
But Matt, show them what we're going to do in terms of putting Hystrix. Like, show them where the real estate on PW on the console.
Yeah, right. So
right in, right?
This thing here is going to turn into right. If I go into console. Come on, internet's working.
Come on.
So let's go take a look at that app. Actually, Spring Cloud doesn't matter really. So if I took one of these apps, the customers. So what I'm kind of envisioning here is, so for an app now, we've got events, we've got services, we've got environment variables. Just another tab here that's in our console. That as soon as you have an app that's circuit breaker enabled, and all those events are being streamed out into the event stream, you have another tab here that has circuit breakers and is basically going to be a nice representation of this stream as this data here.
So instead of having to go individually to a Hystrix dashboard, it just becomes another part of our metric stream that you can see data.
Yeah, so I mean, like, that's great, right? That, and obviously we have to crawl, walk, run, or whatever, but
yeah, this is day one. We've only done the Spring integration so far. We haven't done the CF integration yet.
Yeah, but that's where that's what we should highlight. I mean,
yeah, this code first saw daylight
and that's not to mention that you still have to deploy stuff, right? Like you figured out Spring Boot, how are you going to put 100 instances out wherever you want it? Like, there's still a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, no. I mean, I get that. I get that, right? I just don't want to, and guys, I'm just pushing, right? And that's what we're supposed to do here.
No,
right?
dude, it's great. That's why I put it live. I was like, don't even.
I was back channeling you. You called me out, right? So it's like.
No, I mean, I think the thing we're trying to do is we're not trying to lock people into a platform, but we're trying.
I mean, I get that.
Frankly, if Cloud Foundry is not the best way to run something, then you should run it wherever it's the best, right? Like, and we should make Cloud Foundry the best place to run Spring by a mile.
But Andrew, the statement you just said there is perfect, right? So we should show that value above and beyond everything else, because Hystrix is Hystrix, Spring Boot is Spring Boot. We should show people why those two things specifically on PCF, and I know it's early, are the best way of doing it, right? Like, a circuit breaker pattern is great.
Maybe we just all kind of take it for granted, but CF push as a deployment mechanism is fairly valuable coming from where most people are starting.
Could be the case. I agree. I think someone was saying in the chat that they still love deploying WAR files to them.
Yeah.
It might have been a joke, but.
Randy says he likes doing it by hand.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
So there's some happy news right there.
Yeah, it's only a block from my house. I live 2 blocks from the stadium. I can hear it going down.
Yeah. I missed it, man. I was gonna stay in town, and I saw the cheapest ticket I could get was about $500. I said, nah, I think I'll go home.
So, is there any other thing we want to cover? We got to an hour. It seems like we went through quite a bit. It was fun to look at the stuff Matt's been doing the demos with, and we've been showing this same demo, even with more depth actually, in all the Cloud Foundry roadshows.
Yep.
I think this stuff is really cool, man. Like these are the hard problems, right? So showing folks that this is the easy way to solve these kind of challenging problems. I think that's great. I mean, it's great to see it all come together so quickly too.
I think the closing thought I would say is we can also, the other thing I learned this week from talking to a bunch of folks, I talked a lot about our metrics server that I've been talking about. I talked about last week, Andrew. Yep. And the comment that they made around Hystrix and the metrics server is that we could show an operator view of all of that in a unified way. So now instead of just the developers just having access to what the Hystrix is showing, we can give the operators a backdoor to get in and see that as well, since it's bound as a service. And the thing I learned about the way a lot of the big banking customers set their platforms up today is that the business units bring to that virtual machine their own metrics and app performance tools, often in very different ways. And so that can limit the visibility that the operations teams have, not the app teams, but the operations teams have of the performance of the app. So by our built-in metrics and then the built-in Hystrix servers with all the link state health, etc., I think that could be a really big dashboard win for them.
I mean, it's all about visibility, right? It's all about information and being able to connect the dots in real time and make decisions. Because anytime one of those circuits is popping open, there's another service that's failing, and that might be external or that might be internal. And there's, obviously, it's one thing for the app to sit there and not fail and degrade gracefully. It's another thing for whoever is running that thing, because you have to assume some of that functionality means real money or real. You wouldn't run it at all if it didn't mean anything. So someone should go fix it.
Yeah. So I think.
Have you guys weaved this into that the stuff you said Francois was doing with you guys, like in sort of as like the design pattern for financial services?
Not yet. No, that's much more generic. Like they wanted to know at a more generic level, and we could have Francois come in and present. Maybe next week we can get him.
Yeah, you know what? We should just cross, because I spent the week with HSBC, and me and you can sync up separately on that, right?
One of the things we missed when we talked about that topic is like highlighting some of the other differences in perspective. Josh is exuberant about the CF becoming a standard, and obviously all of us on the Hangout are, but then there's other ideas out there, and some of them are not all useless. So it'd be kind of interesting to see the contrast.
Sorry, from what point of view, Andrew?
Well, just the financial services panel and some of these other vendors and their models. I think we actually learned a lot. I learned a lot looking at some of the the models that they had for how they wanted to represent things.
Got it.
Makes our view, you just learn from the difference. Whenever there's a difference, that you should understand why it's different, not just dismiss it.
Okay.
Anyway, with that, is there anything else other than it seems like the Giants? It seems like there's probably Giants fans going on. Go Giants!
The game ended just as we started, so we're good.
Yeah.
Not a big sports guy myself, but my neighborhood is crawling in it. So what can I say? Go Giants!
Anything else, and we'll call it a day. Call it a show.
Cool.
All right, till next time. Cloud Foundry after dark.
Thanks for joining, Randy. Welcome.